and I'm in the back doing something, and all of a sudden, two of my coworkers come running in, and they're going, "Oh my God, Dana White and Chuck Liddell are here, and they're looking for you."
An Empire Boxing and Unlearning Network production.
Welcome back to the Empire Boxing Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Jay, and today I'm thrilled to introduce Kevin Iole, a Nevada Boxing Hall of Famer journalist with an impressive 4 decades of experience writing in the combat sport arena. Kevin has won multiple awards as a journalist, and recently, I believe I saw you pop up in an episode of UFC Embedded for Strickland Duplessis.
Might have been on there. That might have been me.
I saw you, and then I was like, oh man, I get to talk to him. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time and welcome.
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much.
And quite an impressive, I was checking out your website. I believe you've just launched that recently. Very impressive, and looking at sort of all the accolades that you've kind of, accrued over the years. And Kevin, I just want to know, where did your love for combat sports begin?
Well, Muhammad Ali was the reason I became a combat sports fan. I was a young boy when Ali fought for the heavyweight title for the first time. And he just captivated me, right? Off the bat, I mean, he was different than everybody else. And he was, he fought like a small guy, but he was 220 pounds. And, he said what he thought, and he was flamboyant. And, he changed, of course, over the years. But Muhammad Ali really was what got me to where I am today. My father was a boxing fan, but nowhere like I was. My father fought in the Army. And a good story, he actually took me to my first fight. Which was Sugar Ray Robinson. So in my opinion, Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest boxer of all time. Robinson's final fight was in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And so my dad wanted to go to the fight. It was about a month after my birthday. So he told my mother he was taking me as a birthday present. Now we know that he just wanted to go to the fight and see Sugar Ray Robinson, but nobody knew at the time it was his final fight, but I got to see it. So I always tell people, one of the great thrills I've had, I got to cover Sugar Ray Robinson, Sugar Ray Leonard, Floyd Mayweather. You talk about all the great welterweights of all time. I was there for most of them.
Yeah, you were probably never so pleased to be dad's scapegoat in your whole life, hey?
That one time was a pretty good one.
Now, curious if you ever got into the athletic side of boxing. Did you ever train yourself, or were you a member at a boxing club growing up? Did you ever get the itch to put the gloves on?
No, I mean, of course, we boxed as kids, we went up to the ballpark up the street from my house, but I never trained as a boxer. I always played most of the team sports and had my nose bloodied a few times as we were boxing. But I always loved, to me, and I loved the drama surrounding it. When back in the day when the fights were on ABC Wide World of Sports, and I know I probably should explain what ABC Wide World of Sports was. A lot of people wouldn't even remember that, but they would show the ring walk and all the people surrounding the fighter and everybody standing up. And that pageantry always got me. Even when I was a teenager, it was really cool to see that, right? And I always used to say to myself, I wonder what those guys think as they're walking, making that walk to the ring. And it was always, and I had that curiosity about the fighters, what motivated them. And I knew how tough it was to get hit in the nose, right? And you look and you say, you're going to get punched in the nose by a George Foreman or a Joe Frazier, and I'm wincing from the kid down the street that's 18 months younger than me. Imagine what it was like to have George Foreman whacking in the nose. And, so I always admired the fighters. And then when MMA came along, I kind of just fell in line with that too. And, I love both of them equally now. And it's like somebody will ask me, which sport do you like better, MMA or boxing? And what I really say is whatever the bigger fight that week is that's going on is the one that I like.
Right. And so you were a Pride fan, I'm guessing, then, early days.
Yeah, I started covering MMA in 2000. So it was kind of Pride was in the middle of their run and their powerful run at that point. And I was, as now, living in Las Vegas. And the Mark Ratner, who now is working for the UFC, he was running the Nevada Athletic Commission at the time. And he had said to me, he goes, you better start brushing up on MMA because we're going to legalize it here and you're probably going to have to cover it. And I was one of 2 boxing writers at the local paper. And my colleague, Royce Fior, he was a guy that loved boxing, but he was a traditionalist. And you could never get him to do MMA. And I wanted to cover more and more things and do more things. And so when MMA became available, I said, why not, why not do it? And so I did, and I grew to, at first I didn't love it. I have to admit, I didn't love it at first, but as I got to understand the sport and the athletes and everything, it just became phenomenal. And I'm lucky I did it, because I wouldn't have the career I have now had it not been for MMA.
Were you always apt for writing? Was that something that you were always passionate about, or was it more your curiosity of the story behind these athletes, these gladiators, as they stepped into the ring?
If you would have asked me when I was 12 or 13 years old what I wanted to do, I would have said, number one, play quarterback for the Steelers or pitch for the Pirates. And knowing that I didn't have anywhere near the ability to do that, the second thing would have been to be a journalist. And I used to lay in bed at night when the Pirates played on the West Coast, and I would actually announce games myself, and be like I was the radio guy. A lot of times I sat there, and I would, in the summer especially, I would make out a newspaper, right? And I would handwrite stories. So much so that my mother actually bought me an electric typewriter, because I would, for my birthday one year, I was always writing and doing things. My brother had no interest in it, right? My brother, it couldn't have got him any less interested in writing and kind of doing that. But that was always something. I was always into sports, 100% a sports person. But if I couldn't play, I wanted to be able to write or talk about it. And fortunately for me, I've been able to do that. I had my first full-time job when I was 19 years old. I don't need to say how old I am right now, but it's a lot of years.
Wow. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was you work with Yahoo Sports. Now, what year did you start with them?
Yeah, so I went to Yahoo Sports in 2007, and it's funny when I think back now. I got a call. It was like a little over a year from the time I first got called about going to Yahoo Sports until I actually started. And I remember a boxing PR guy who was based in LA. He knew Dave Morgan, who was the assistant sports editor of the LA Times, who had been hired in late 2005 to build a staff at Yahoo. And so in January of 2006, this PR person, Bill Kaplan, calls me and says, do you know Dave Morgan? And I said, of course I know Dave Morgan. And he said, well, you should give him a call, because he's interested in hiring you for Yahoo. This was January of 2006. I didn't actually get hired until April of 2007, because he was building the entire staff. And so he had to hire everybody, and he was hiring in kind of significance of the sport. So we hired NFL people, then we hired NBA people, and they just kept adding on. And I finally got my chance in 2007. And the first fight I covered for them was Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya. So it was a pretty good introduction for me to Yahoo Sports.
And now here's kind of a nostalgic question for you. That very first moment where you had a piece of yours published in a paper, how did that feel? Did you know at that point that you were like, this is it, this is what I want to do?
No, I 100% I knew. And it was the Valley News Dispatch. It was a paper I ended up getting a full-time job at, but it was run by the Gannett Corporation, owned by the Gannett Corporation. It was in suburban Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And I got a part-time job there first, covering high school sports, and it was like so cool. And I used to remember, Saturday morning we would run to get the paper, because we'd want to see how all our friends did in high school football. And there would be they were huge on high school sports in that paper. And I would run out and get the paper, and I would see all the different bylines, and I didn't know those people, but I looked up to them just because their byline was in the paper, and they were covering a high school football game, somewhere around me. And so when I got to do it, it was like really cool. And there was nothing better than walking up and down the sideline, writing about high school football. And that was a great experience. And it just let me know that that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I'm happiest when I'm writing. I'm happiest when I'm around sports. I put the two together, and, it's never a bad day.
Amazing. Now, how have you noticed, like, sort of, the rise of the iPhone and having just media at your fingertips? And how have you noticed the landscape change for how people are consuming their sports content, with like the rise of Bleacher Report, and how has that affected what you do?
Well, of course it changes, right? It changed a lot. Now, I should say I had a part-time job at Apple, and I actually worked on iPhone. I worked on iPhone launch day. And,
wow, okay. Wow,
yeah,
no way.
Yeah, that was like, I worked at Apple. The Apple Store opened in Vegas in late 03. So I think I started like in September of 03, and I was there for about 5 years, working mostly on weekends, part-time. And then I quit when I went to Yahoo for about a year. And then I realized, hey, I could still work, 18, 20 hours a week. And so I kind of went back and worked for another year and a half. It just finally got to be too much because I was traveling so much for Yahoo. But yeah, I was there, for a long time, and I was working on iPhone launch day. And I can't even tell you, like, it was funny how many fighters I would see when I was working at the Apple store, fighters coming into the store. Dana White, one time, if I have time for a quick story, I'll tell you this Dana White story.
Yes. We always have time for a Dana White story.
This was around Christmas, whatever, maybe it was 07, 08. I can't think of exactly what year it was, but we were having a contest Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. All the employees of this particular Apple store, what we had to do was sell accessories. So we put all the accessories that we sold into a hat, and you would pull a name out each day. You'd pull one on Friday, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. And so going into Sunday, I'm leading the contest, and the winner of the contest gets a $500 gift card. Now, excuse me, I'm in my 40s at that point. Most of the kids working there were teenagers in their early 20s, and that was it. So I was kind of a mentor to a lot of the kids. So I was in the back, and as Sunday comes, I pull my thing out, and I get iPod Apple Care, which was the absolute worst thing. And at that time, we never sold any iPod Apple Cares whatsoever. So I realized, oh well, I'm not going to win the $500 gift card. So the day's going on, and of course, I'm not selling any iPod Apple Care. And I'm in the back doing something, and all of a sudden, two of my coworkers come running in, and they're going, "Oh my God, Dana White and Chuck Liddell are here, and they're looking for you." So I walk, and these kids are like starstruck. I walk out and I see him. And so Dana wants to buy Christmas gifts for his staff. So I said, "What can I get for you, Dana?" And he goes, "I need 150 iPods. And I go, 150 iPods. Now, getting 150 iPods is going to do me no good. Getting me 150 iPod Apple Cares is going to, and they were $79 a piece, right?
So did you turn it around?
Well, we have to tell the story.
All the way through.
And those days, they had cash registers. Like right now, the Apple stores don't have cash registers, but in those days we did. So I make the call to the back. I get the 150 iPods, get them ready to be brought out, and I bring them up to the front, and I hand it off to this woman named Samantha Samuels. She's now actually working on movies at Pixar. And Sam was running the cashier. And so I said, "Dana, this is Sam. She's going to take it from here." That was what we were supposed to do. And as I start to walk away, Sam says to Dana, "Do you want to buy iPod Apple Care with these?" And Dana goes, first he says immediately no. And then he goes, "Well, wait a minute, what is it?" And I laugh and I said, "I win the contest if you buy it." And he goes, "Yes." He goes, "I'll take it." So he buys 150 iPod Apple Care at $80. So I can win a $500 gift card.
No way.
So that was hilarious.
So when they came into the store and they were looking for you, did they already know you through the sports reporting world? Like you would report?
I was covering UFC at that point. So I started covering them in 2000. Yeah, so it was pretty funny.
Cool. Awesome. And did Chuck Liddell buy anything?
Chuck didn't, but Dana bought plenty. So
150 iPods with Apple Care.
Yeah, so nobody was complaining about that day.
Okay, so and then what did you do with your gift card? What did you get?
I don't actually remember what I got, but probably a laptop because I was always looking for new stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. What a great story. I bet you have a lot of good Dana White stories. So funny. I was just talking about him before I logged on with you. I was like, I bet out of anyone I've probably interviewed, I think the behind the scenes, you might have the most interesting dirt.
I have no, I knew Dana before he was in the UFC, like when he was just in boxing. And I had lunch with Lorenzo Fertitta one day when he was trying to pitch me on covering the UFC after they had purchased it. And I said, "Oh, who's going to run the company for you?" And he goes, "Dana White." And of course I knew Dana, but I did not think of, I thought Dana was like a boxing trainer. And I go, "Dana White? You mean the guy you went to school with, Dana White?" And he goes, "Yeah, why? Is there something wrong with him?" I go, "No, but I never thought of him as like a guy running a company, right?" He goes, "Well, no." Wow. So of course how wrong was I on that?
Yeah, now one of the biggest in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Incredible. So, that sort of the rise of the digital era and seeing that analog, that that newspaper, that coveted newspaper, he'd race out in the morning to seeing that sort of that chapter leave us a little bit. Was that a challenging thing? Or it sounds like you almost had a bit of a step up as you were already kind of adopting into the technology space. So did you find that helped you sort of bridge that gap?
Well, I always loved technology, so it was something for me to go ahead and work for. That's why I worked at Apple, because I love technology. And I just wanted to learn, more about it. But, even to this day, I'm here in 2024 running my own website, and there's challenges of writing for the internet, right? And it's different than writing for a newspaper, vastly different. And in order to, maximize your traffic and get, and the thing was, it was interesting. On a newspaper, you never knew how many people were reading what you wrote. So you would write a story and it would just be out there, and you didn't know if one person read it or every person who picked up the newspaper read it. But now we know, when they pick it up, how long they read it, where they're at when they're reading it. I mean, we know all that information, but it's how do you make use of that? Some people have done that a lot better than others, but it is different. And, I try to think that I can be progressive and stay with the times, but, I'm also a creature of habit, and I've done, I learn things in one way, and I try to always remember those lessons that I learned in journalism school and what was important. And so, sometimes my two worlds butt heads against each other.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, with all the readily available analytics, has it changed your writing style or influence, how long your pieces are, et cetera?
Well, like Saturday night was a great example. I sat here and there was a boxing title, not a title fight, but a zone card in Phoenix, and Jaime Munguia is fighting John Ryder. Yes. So I'm watching the card. I'm gonna write about that card when the night's over. Now, if it was a newspaper, I would more put a lot of detail about what happened in the fight, X's and O's and everything. But instead, what I had to do writing for the internet, you kind of want to, what they always would say, spin it forward. So I want to say, okay, what does this mean? Because I know most of the people who are going to read my story have watched that fight. Not everybody. And so there's certain details that you have to get in there. The basics of journalism, who, what, when, where, and why. You have to be in every story you do, no matter, where it is. But now going forward and how do I tell the story? Do I just kind of go through the fight in a newspaper, say, here's how the fight went? Or do I tell the story a little bit differently? And so I always try to look at it and say, hey, let's spin it forward. What would be next? So I looked at it that way as, hey, is Jaime Munguia ready to fight Canelo Alvarez? That was kind of my thought. So I called Freddie Roach, who is the new trainer of Munguia. And I asked Freddie, hey, do you think he's ready for Canelo? And he said, well, I think if it were up to me, he would need at least one more fight. Munguia said that he would need one more fight, but Oscar De La Hoya, the promoter, said, I think that should be the next fight, right? So I had to navigate that sort of thing. And I felt like my story was better than it would have been if it was in a newspaper because, people saw the fight, they understand who won, and now they want to know sort of how did he look, what does this mean in the bigger picture? And so I think, the modern style of writing like that actually lends itself sometimes to better stuff.
Yeah. Now, as a fan, what was your opinion on the Munguia Ryder fight? Because specifically in how it relates to Munguia Alvarez, because I thought, Ryder looked a lot better against Canelo. I mean, Munguia shut Ryder down by the second round. It was completely tipped one side. So as a fan, getting the feedback from Roach as you did and De La Hoya as you did, what was your conclusion?
Well, as I watched the fight, excuse me, I even wrote before the fight, I thought Ryder is not really an elite level fighter. Ryder is a guy at that next level, not fair to call him an opponent, but he's just a little bit above that, right? He's a guy that's good enough to beat the average fighters, but he's not really good enough to beat the elite fighter, but he can push those elite fighters and make them work. And he's kind of a stepping stone guy. So I thought going into the fight that that's who he was, and that we would find out about Munguia, not Ryder. I kind of figured Ryder would fight the way he fights, which he did. But I think what you notice in that fight was that Ryder gave everything he had against Canelo. That's the fight of his life. And he was clearly overmatched, and he took a beating. And I think the toll of all of the fights that he had over the years, Ryder was not like Floyd Mayweather at 40 years old still was quick and good defensively because he had never been hit, and he was still able to avoid punches. John Ryder took punishment in all his fights that he fought. And so after the human body can only take so many punches. And after a period of time, he was going to wear down. And I think Munguia caught him at the absolute right time, right? He got there and, he just wasn't the same guy that he was even when he fought Canelo. What was it, a little over a year earlier, right? So he just didn't have that that same juice.
Yeah, I love that analysis and perspective, actually. And I think that fight from Canelo with Ryder brought back a better Canelo for his next fight. Everyone was kind of going, I don't know, is he washed up? Is he old? Is he starting to wind down? That was a lot of the conversations that were happening after that fight, because everyone's like, John Ryder at least took him way farther than anyone expected. But I think that pushed Canelo to have a better performance in his following fight. What do you think?
And I do. And I think that, Canelo is also at that point of his career where, he doesn't get up for every fight, right? He's good enough. He's good enough to beat everybody he fights, right? But for Canelo to have the really high performance, he has to feel danger, and he has to feel like, if I'm not on top of my game, I can lose this fight. And I think, Canelo respects boxing. So he trained and he got in shape for the Ryder fight. But mentally, was he sitting there thinking John Ryder can beat me? And I don't think he was. And so I don't think he had that same motivation. And he spent a lot of time before that fight with the people, because the fight was in Guadalajara, where he was born and raised. And so, he did a lot of stuff with the people in Guadalajara. And I don't think that he would have done that if the fight was in Las Vegas and he was fighting, a different opponent. So, I think that's why Canelo looked the way, he did look. Look what he did against when he fought Jermell Charlo. So I think, a big difference there.
Yeah. What a I think such a great analysis. Do you think that's a similar mindset and scenario that we saw play out between Fury and Ngannou? Just like
100%.
Yeah.
Fury just never believed him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what a surprising fight. What did you think of that?
Well, I thought it was an awful fight, right? But it was suspenseful because Ngannou knocked him down, and it was close, right? Neither guy threw a lot of punches. Neither guy, if you look at the punches thrown, they were in the single digits in almost every round. It was just, but people were excited even as the fight was unfolding, because Ngannou's doing way better than they thought, right? He looked good, he wasn't throwing crazy wild punches. He was throwing them from within a boxing, stand. He wasn't just coming up with, shots over the top. Yeah. And so he looked like he was a boxer, and he knocks Tyson down. It was a clean knockdown, no argument about the knockdown. And, going into the last 3 rounds, we didn't know who was going to win the fight. And so I think that's why people, they built it up. Now, Anthony Joshua, I would assume, learned from that, and he watched that fight and he saw what could happen and how close Tyson Fury came to blowing everything. And I would think Anthony Joshua would take Francis Ngannou a lot more seriously than Tyson Fury did.
Yeah, that'll be the next one to see. I think Ngannou belongs in boxing. I think he should stay. What do you think?
I want to see him fight more. I think, we just said, hey, he starts at the top. So let's start there. God bless Francis for starting with the absolute best guy in the world, right? Yeah. He goes out there and takes on the heavyweight champion. And not, it would have been one thing if he would have fought Usyk, who he would have had a size advantage on. He goes out there and he fights a 6'9", 275-pound opponent who has an 85-inch reach. So, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball. So God bless Francis for being willing to do that. But as I said, and I will, say this to my dying day, it was a terrible fight. It was not a very good fight. And if it was Joe Blow and not Francis Ngannou, everybody would have been mad at the way the fight went. But because it was a guy coming from MMA and the record of MMA fighters against boxers, people got into it. So does Francis belong in boxing? Well, obviously people were paying to see him, so I guess that means he belongs in boxing. But it is important to note the fight did not do anything on pay-per-view. Terrible numbers on pay-per-view. I think it was like 12,000, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think the Joshua fight is going to be much better. Francis is lucky in the one sense that the Saudis don't care about the pay-per-view. They want to they want to build boxing in their country. They want to get people to come to Saudi Arabia and want to vacation there, want to retire there, and all those things. And that's what they're trying to use boxing for. They're not worried about a couple of bucks on a pay-per-view card. So so that's the concern of the promoters who are putting on the fight. So I think Francis will probably unless he gets like just totally whacked and destroyed against Anthony Joshua, I think you'll have at least one more, if not a few more boxing matches.
Yeah, so interesting. I love your perspective on all of it. I was surprised, like pleasantly surprised anyways, because, and maybe you have a better opinion on this as well, but I noticed a lot of the training footage and like the pre-fight hype and the camp footage that was leaked from the Ngannou camp with Tyson. There was a lot of shade being thrown. Like everyone's going, oh my God, he looks terrible. Like Tyson should get in there. Now, my question to you is, do you think that was on purpose to sort of, I don't know, do a little bait and switch and surprise people on a boxing main stage like that?
Well, the only thing I think was a bait and switch was the fact that Mike Tyson was actually training him. It was Dewey Cooper who trained him the whole time, right? Mike Tyson was paid by the Saudis to go in and act as the trainer, and he did his job, right? He was there, but he wasn't around Francis on a day-to-day basis. Dewey Cooper and Eric Nixick were the two that were around Francis on a day-to-day basis, and they're the ones that came, Dewey Cooper especially came up with the game plan and taught him. But I think what you saw was the evolution of Francis over the course of a training camp. Hey, look, he's a great athlete, right? I mean, he's a world-class athlete, and he knows how to fight from having fought MMA for as long as he did. So, having a good trainer was able to help him. I don't think that they were trying to embarrass anybody. I think, they wanted to create. I think on Francis' side going into that fight, if they could have convinced as many people as possible that Francis had the power to knock Tyson out, that's what they really wanted to do. So I don't think they were kind of baiting and switching, other than the fact that they, made people think Mike Tyson was the number one trainer.
Interesting. Yeah, I was wondering if it was sort of like instigating a slower and less calculated response from Fury, maybe as part of the game plan. The old like with when Duplessis trained Southpaw. to I don't know, I was like, you never know. I think there's so much of that you probably see behind the scenes when it comes to the evolution of the storytelling before the actual fight itself, what's happening behind the scenes.
Well, there's always those mind games, right, that go on. And so, like when Tyson Fury fought Deontay Wilder the second time, from the first day the fight was announced, I remember talking to Tyson, and he said, I saw what happened in the first fight, and the only way I can win this fight is to walk right out of my corner, go out and start trying to knock Deontay Wilder out. That's the way I'm going to win the fight. And we're going like, are you nuts? Deontay Wilder's the biggest puncher there is, and you're a boxer, and, you won the fight. You should have won the fight the first time, and you boxed him brilliantly. You're going to go out there and try to knock him out. And he said, yes. And we all thought he was kidding. And then he did. That's exactly what he did, right? So he told you what he was going to do. Nobody believed him, and he did it. So sometimes they say things and they mean them. Sometimes they say things and they're just trying to put it out there, for their opponents. And, that's what makes the fight game so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're definitely the absolute epitome of, a pro in your game. Because just listening to you talk and analyze, and there's so much depth and understanding. I could chat boxing with you all day and get your perspective on everything. But I do want to bring it back to you. I kind of would love to know, what was the most, memorable moment and most memorable fight you covered in your career so far, or a top couple if you have them.
Sure. Being at the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight was an amazing experience, because I was sitting next to Tim Dahlberg, who was the Associated Press columnist at that fight. And Tim and I had covered boxing matches together for 30 years up to that point. And Tim, who's now retired, had been covering boxing even a little bit before I did it. And we had seen so many great fights and so many things. And when we were at Mayweather-Pacquiao, it was like, I remember I turned to him as they were getting ready to sing the national anthem, and I said, this is like the Ali Frazier of our time, right? This, it doesn't get any bigger than this. Of our lifetime, this is it. And the place was going crazy and filled, and the whole city. You had to be in Las Vegas to understand what it was like for that fight. And I mean, I just remember when that fight got made, they met at the NBA game, the Miami Heat game. After the game, they went over to Mayweather's hotel room and they discussed putting a fight together. A couple of weeks later, the fight was actually made. And everywhere I went in Las Vegas, every single day until the fight was made, I'd be pumping gas, or I'd be in the grocery store, I'd be in a restaurant, and somebody would come up to me and say, "What do you think of Mayweather Pacquiao?" Every single day of my life. And it was just like, no matter where I went, people that I did not know, I'd be pumping my gas and someone would recognize me and ask me about the fight. Waiters I would go to the same restaurant a lot, and they knew me and they would talk to me about the fight. Everywhere you would go, other fighters. So when I'm sitting there at ringside for that fight, and I have a picture of myself and Tim doing it that night, I was like, this is as big as it gets for our lifetimes. There's not going to be anything any bigger. And that was really cool to be there. The best fight I ever covered was Corrales and Castillo in person. Corrales Castillo was one of the most amazing fights. And Diego Corrales, God rest his soul, said to me fight week, he said, I will walk through the fires of hell to win this fight. And then did that become prophetic on fight night when it was, for the first 9 rounds, just an unbelievable fight. And then you go to the 10th round and Diego gets knocked down twice. After the second one, he spits out the mouthpiece. And you're thinking, whenever a fighter spits out the mouthpiece, that's saying, I don't want to fight anymore. And they put the mouthpiece back in, they let it go. Joe Gusa said, you better get in gear right now. And Corrales comes out and he whacks Castillo and he stops Castillo. Just an unbelievable, dramatic finish to an unbelievable, amazing fight. And I know there wasn't that many people there that night, but I cannot recount how many people I have met subsequently that told me they were there. And I'm grateful that I was, because that fight was I think that fight ranks among the greatest fights ever in boxing history. And certainly of the fights I covered, I've seen a lot of other fights, but of the fights I actually covered it in person, that is the best.
That incredible story. From a media perspective, what are your thoughts on the crossover boxing and how it affects the boxing world? There's a lot of talk about that and its implications right now, and I'd love your perspective.
I hate it with a passion, right? I mean, as far as fighters, it's making a joke of the fight, right? Do we go out there and do we have, tennis players, playing in the Masters,
That's what I've been saying.
Right. Like you think about it, and it's making a farce of the sport, which is really hard and it's not easy, right? I mean, and so you're joking on something that people dedicate their lives to. And I just don't like it. And I think what ends up happening, too, is it hurts the sport altogether, because a lot of these people are celebrities in a different field and they're higher profile than the fighters themselves that are competing for world titles. And so when they go out, they're getting a lot more attention than the great fighters who are trying to build their names and build their reputations. Everybody knows Tyson Fury. Everybody knew Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. But there's a lot of other fighters out there who are terrific fighters that the public at large, the boxing public knows them, but the wider, public at large doesn't know. And then these people that are fighting in the celebrity fights come in and they take it over. And I just don't like it. And that, I don't like the MMA versus boxing thing for a different reason. But, I am more of a traditionalist, I guess, in that area. I'm happy that, fighters like the fighters that are fighting Jake Paul were making money. God bless them for that. And if there's a silver lining in it, that's what it is. But, at least I give Jake Paul credit now. He's now starting to fight boxers and try to develop himself really as a boxer.
I think, to his credit, the most, in my opinion, the most important things he's doing is, his work with, trying to push, Amanda Serrano and women's boxing a little bit further up the stage. But I'm with you. There's no other sport in which this exists. Like, you don't have, an NFL quarterback going and pitching for the Dodgers.
Right.
But it's celebrity slipstreaming. That's exactly what it is. Exactly what you said.
And imagine what a farce that would be and what everybody would say if, in fact, they did that. If Patrick Mahomes was pitching in a World Series, right? I mean, what would people say?
It would be an absolute uproar. Yeah, I'm with you, and it's interesting. I've had the opportunity to talk to, a few people with different perspectives, very heavily in the sports themselves, and so it's interesting to kind of get everyone's thoughts. And I think it will evolve, and our opinions of it might evolve as well. But it remains to be seen what lies ahead. I think boxing in general is changing quite a bit right now. Probably the most it's changed in years.
Well, we had a good, 2023 was a really good year for making fights, right? So if they get the fights that we want to see made, then I'm okay. I won't pay attention to it, but I'm okay with that happening. But, like DAZN is spending a lot of money on what they call misfits boxing, right? And they're investing a lot in that genre. And if they're not getting fights made because of a couple million here, a couple million there, that we want to see, then that's a problem. But if, 2023, not every fight that we wanted to see was made. It wasn't a perfect year, but it was one of the better years boxing had in a long time. And there was a lot of those matchups that, that were so long awaited, they got made. And that's carrying over, it seems like, into 2024. So if that happens, then I don't have much of a complaint. If that floats your boat and you want to watch that stuff, go ahead. I'll watch Fury and Usyk and those kind of fights.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What are you most excited to see for fights and matchups in boxing this year? And what are you most excited to see in MMA?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm really excited for those next 3 UFC pay-per-views because I think, I don't know what Dana White was doing, but he's loaded up UFC 298, 299, and 300. And we don't even have the main event of UFC 300 yet, but Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. I mean, how can you not be excited for that, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the highlight, it's going to be just a sensational fight. And I think it's going to steal the headlines from whatever fight is, ends up headlining, that show. Gaethje and Holloway is a fight that's going to just be a really good action fight as long as it lasts. But I love the fact that you have Volkanovski coming back. Look at Alex Volkanovski doing. He goes out there and he fights Islam Makhachev on short notice, gets knocked out. He comes back and he's fighting an undefeated knockout artist in his first featherweight title defense, right? That's February 17th at UFC 298 when he meets Ilia Topuria. So you got to love that. Chito Vera is going to challenge Sean O'Malley for the bantamweight title at UFC 299. They fought once before. I was at that fight. Sean O'Malley got wheeled past me on a stretcher. That's how that fight left.
Wow.
So now they're going to fight, for the championship. That's good. From a boxing standpoint, I love the heavyweights. Love the heavyweights. And we got a legitimate big-time heavyweight fight with Usyk and Fury, right? And it's a fight where, exactly. And I think you can say, Fury deserves to be the favorite in the fight, but Usyk has a chance to win. And, when is the last time, that we really went there like, maybe going back to the first Wilder Fury fight, right? Where the B side of the fight really had a chance. You can make a good argument for him winning.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm very much excited to see that as well. Just a little bit of a topic change. What are your thoughts on, PBC moving to Amazon, and how will this affect the current boxing climate?
Well, I am hopeful that there'll be as many outlets for fighters on Amazon Prime as there were on Showtime. I'm afraid that that's not going to be the case. And I actually did a story today where Austin Trout, the former 154-pound world champion in boxing, he's fighting on Friday in a bare-knuckle boxing match. And I discussed with him, would more boxers go to BKFC? And he thought that they would for the reason that he said the pay is good and that there's a lot of boxers who aren't getting the fights they want because Showtime is out of boxing. Amazon's not going to show as many fights as Showtime did. So there's some openings, going along. And so, he feels like you're going to see boxers, move over to bare knuckle fighting. And so no offense to people in bare knuckle, but, I want to see the elite boxers fight the other elite boxers, right?
Yeah.
And not move into another sport. So, I feel like it's good that Amazon has wide distribution. It's worldwide. It's going to hit everybody. The thing that I dislike is, it's another. I wish there was outlets that were free for the fans, right? Because everything is now paid. It used to be we could turn on NBC or CBS or ABC, whatever, and we would be able to get a couple of fights anyways and see them for free. And now every single thing you do, is, and even the premium cable era was that way. But now it's like, you got to buy ESPN Plus, and you got DAZN is making their subscription price like crazy. If you want to watch the PBC fights on Amazon, you have to buy an Amazon Prime Video, Amazon Prime account to get Prime Video. And I don't know the numbers, but how many people shop on Amazon? I'll bet you it's in the hundreds of millions who don't have a Prime account, right? And so a lot of those people are going to think they're going to see those fights, and they're not, and they're going to be asked to spend, what is an Amazon Prime Video account now? I think it's $150, right? So it's in that ballpark range. People are going to spend a lot more money. So I'm happy that the exposure will be there for the fighters, number one. I hope that they keep up the quality that Showtime had with the production and what the commitment to good fights that Showtime had. I think that they will, because I think a lot of the people that were with Showtime are going to end up on the production team in Amazon and be the ones doing those fights. But Showtime was a sure thing, a known commodity. And we're going to lose their ShowBox series. We're not going to have that anymore. And there's not going to be as many fight nights on Amazon as there was. So we are losing. But at least if Amazon does keep it true and keep the quality up, it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, very interesting. So going back to bare knuckle and power slap, like, did you ever think in your career you'd be covering something like power slap?
No.
And like, do you find that, okay, no hate on power slapping, bare knuckle, but did you find that difficult to get into as like
yes.
a
let me tell
boxing fan?
Well, I'll tell you my power slap journey, right? So, let me even go back. I'll give you a Dana White story from my early days at the UFC, right?
I'm ready.
So, and this actually played out in front of a bunch of my peers. So back in the day when I first started covering MMA, I had watched as a fan the pay-per-views of UFC 1 through 5, maybe. And then I think it was UFC 6. Emmanuel Yarbrough was a 600-pound guy, and he fought Keith Hackney, who was 190 pounds. And I'm watching this, and I'm going like, what the hell is this? A 400-pound weight difference? And so I kind of quit watching the UFC at that point. I got away from MMA. Now, Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta buy the UFC, and so I get back into it because I thought Lorenzo was such a significant person in this community in Las Vegas, and I knew Lorenzo was a smart guy. I said, hey, if he's involved in it, it's probably worth covering, and let me do this. But I knew nothing about ground fighting, right? Literally nothing. So I used to go over to the old UFC offices, which were on West Sahara in Las Vegas, behind an old In-N-Out burger. And I would go, Dana White's office was in the map room at that building, which was very tiny. And we used to get on the ground and grapple, and he would be showing me things. And we were laying on the floor. We're knocking books out of bookcases, and things are going as he's trying to show me like different grappling moves. Now, you fast forward to when the UFC opened Apex, and that day, Dana took the Las Vegas media on a tour. So there was John Morgan from MMA Junkie at the time, Brett Okamoto from ESPN, Adam Hill from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. A bunch of us, we were touring the Apex, and we get to Dana's office. And he's about to open the office, which, as you can imagine, is massive and, just as incredible office. He starts to open the door, and he closes it. And I happen to be standing right next to him. And he says, this guy here will testify that my office used to be no bigger than a broom closet. He goes, in fact, we rolled around on the floor grappling, and everybody's like looking at me like, what's going on? And then Dana starts, telling the story of what happened, back in the day. And I'm there, yep, that actually happened. I was rolling around on the floor with Dana White. And then I eventually moved on. He passed me off to some other people, and I did the rolling around so I could learn, what was going on, from those people. But so that was how I kind of learned UFC, or MMA, excuse me. So when Power Slap came around, Dana says, I remember the same thing from you back in the day. You don't want to do it. So they had a test event in 2022, and I went. It was 15 fights. I went to that test event, and I watched about 12 of the fights, and it was not a good show. And later, they now admit that it wasn't a good show. They were trying to figure out how to do it. the fighters didn't know the rules. There was a lot of fouls. There was, a lot of stuff. And I left after 12 fights. And I did not have this anger like, oh, this is going to be harmful to society. But I'm like, this is just not for me. But now, like 15 months passes, and now they got it rolling. It's on television. And Dana called me and says, I'll bet you if you came and watched a fight now, you would think it's worth it. So I actually said, okay, let me go out and I'll do it. So I interviewed a bunch of the fighters. And the fighters all told me, says, it's not even as dangerous as boxing or MMA because we're not getting hit in training. And a lot of the injuries that prove traumatic, and especially in boxing, occur in the gym, and then they take head injuries into fights, and tragedies can occur. And so they said, we're not getting hit in training. We never get hit. So the only time we ever get hit is when we're in a fight. And the most you can get hit in a fight is 5 rounds, and very few fights go 5 rounds. So you're saying you're a lot safer. So that made sense to me. Then I started talking to a bunch of doctors who have covered boxing over the years, and they said, well, it would not be my choice. I don't have this big, problem with it. So I finally said, all right, you know what? If it's not, nobody's getting hurt and there's no serious, there's always a risk of injury in any kind of contact sport, not just combat sport, but if there's not a greater risk than anything else, then let them do it. So I went to the one fight then, that Dana asked me to go to. And I thought it was like, it's not my thing still, but it wasn't bad, right? And there was some crazy knockouts, and I remember the women's fight. It was the first official women's fight, and this woman Sheena Bathory comes up to fight, and she gets whacked in the face, and she blows a kiss at the other woman, and it was just wild because I'm going, how does she take that shot? And she blows a kiss, and then the very next slap, she knocks the woman out. So to me, I thought, hey, it's not bad. So when I decided to start my own site, I said, there are fans of this, and they don't really have coverage. Same thing with bare knuckle fighting. So I'm going to try to provide it. So I've done 2 bare knuckle stories so far, and to be honest with you, it hasn't gone good in terms of traffic, especially relative to the other stuff that I write, right? But I have to be patient with it because I realize I'm on a new venture. Not a lot of people know where I'm at now. I think everybody knows where I am, but you realize that, they don't really. And so I have to make people aware of it. So I'm just going to have to keep doing it and keep putting it out. And of course, my coverage is going to be mainly focused on boxing and MMA. But when I get a chance to cover the bare knuckle fights, or when I get a chance to cover the slap fight, I'm going to do it to try to hit that other audience that's into combat sports, but maybe not so much into boxing or MMA.
Interesting. Yeah. I still am struggling to even call it a fight, but slap off. But I do find I think it really does appeal, and you'd have a deeper sense of what demographic, they're really going for. But I feel like we're in a place in time where the attention span is so short, and our need for excitement is it's a razor thin, to the point where the crowd wants the emotion, they want the adrenaline, they want that flood. So I feel like Power Slap pretty much checks all those boxes. It's instant gratification and it's short-lived.
That's a really astute point. And John Morgan, formerly an MMA junkie, his son Eli, I think, is 11 years old and trains jiu-jitsu. And one of the slap fights I was at, I saw Eli at the fight, and I was talking to his dad, and I said, how does Eli like the slap fights? And he said he loves them better than MMA. He goes, go ask him why. So I go over to Eli and I said, hey, how do you like the slap fight? He goes, oh, I love it. And without me asking him, then he said it's better than MMA. And I'm a little bit taken aback. This is a guy that is training in jiu-jitsu, right? So he can fight MMA. I said, what is it, Eli, that you like better? He goes, they're fast. We get to see the knockouts all the time. And so you 100% hit on it. Now, he's an 11-year-old kid, but I think he is representative of the audience that they are shooting for, right? And that's why if you look at on their TikTok, their highlights are, 150 million, not thousand, 150 million views. It's crazy, right? And, there's people that are definitely interested in it, and they love those crazy knockouts, and, they can sit there and they can watch that and then go out and party, and they're not there all night. Where you go to a UFC fight and you go to all the fights, you start at 3:00, you're not done until 10:30, right? It's a long day.
And in terms of how it ends up translating into social media, you watch it for 3 seconds, you get your jimmies, the bloodlust is checked, and you're on your way. So I do think it's really interesting. And I think that's very telling for, kind of the place where we're at and how we're consuming content in general, actually. Now, Kevin, I want to go through your boxing Sweet 16, if you don't mind. I saw your list. I loved it.
Did you disagree?
You know what? A couple of them, but I also, because it's been such a pleasure to hear, all your perspectives and your whys, I want to get a couple of your whys. So, and for anyone watching this, go to Kevin's website, keviniole.com, and he's also got an MMA Sweet 16. We'll touch on that one first, because I just want to bring up your top 5, and then I want to dive into the boxing ones with you.
Okay.
Top 5, you had Jon Jones holding the number 1 spot. Why do you think Bones deserves that?
John has fought for such a long time. His only loss was a disqualification by the referee. He's beaten a slew of Hall of Famers, and until he's excuse me, then he moves up from light heavyweight, wins the heavyweight title. Not only does he win the heavyweight title, but he wins it in 2 minutes, right? Submits a really good athlete in Cyril Gahn. So I think John, this guy has been doing it for. I think he won the title in 2011, so we're looking at 13 years in March. It's just amazing what he's been able to accomplish.
And then we've got Islam Makhachev, number 2. I think there's nothing more terrifying than these Chechnyan mountain boys. They're just bred for war. So why do you have Islam as your number 2?
Well, look what he's done. He's got back-to-back wins over Alexander Volkanovski, who a lot of people thought was the number 1 pound-for-pound guy in the world. He's on a long winning streak. Like you say, that wrestling is, so far above everybody else in the sport. And his hands are becoming really good now. And so I think, you look at Islam's body of work and you look at that terrific terrific wrestling that he has. He's going to be in every fight. And it's hard not, a lot of people have him number 1. ESPN has him number 1. I just felt like Jon Jones is the GOAT and he deserves to be recognized as such.
I know someone who's going to be very pleased that you put Jon Jones as their number 1.
And then, Jon Jones, most of the time.
And then we've got Volkanovski. You just touched on him as number 3. He's a consummate professional. What an athlete. So why do you have Alexander as your number 3?
So what did he win? Over 20 fights in a row. Then he goes up in weight. And, the first fight against Makhachev, I thought Makhachev won, but it was a close fight. You could have made an argument that Volkanovski won that fight. No argument on the second fight, but, he's fighting the absolute best guys out there on a regular basis, right? He's cleaned out the division more than once. And I just think, when you look at his resume, it stacks up with not only anybody active today, but anybody of all time.
Well, and he's also someone who's come from another professional sporting career as a professional rugby player. I cannot picture him over 200 pounds, but there's that as well. I mean, I don't think he would have a neck really at 200 pounds, but yeah, just a consummate professional. What an athlete in Volkanovski. And then we got Leon Edwards sitting number 4. I hadn't really followed his career much, but and I do follow UFC, but he was just so understated. I think it's his persona was so understated. He sort of slipped through my radar. So why do you have Leon Edwards as your number 4?
If you look, Leon, unlike a lot of UFC fighters, he didn't get a really big push because his career would stop and start. He would fight a couple of fights and get injured, and he was out a long period of time. And so he didn't have that consistent where Leon fights so-and-so. He says in the ring, I want to fight this guy. He comes out and fights that guy and goes on to the next one. He had these fits and starts. But now you go back and you look what he did. He wins the title with that dramatic knockout of Kamaru Usman. He comes back, from that fight, and he really makes a comprehensive victory over Usman in the rematch. Then he comes out and he dominates Colby Covington. Who's dominated Colby Covington? Nobody. And he does that. And I think, you look at the winning streak that he's on, the way he's won these fights, who he's won his fights against, and I think it's a pretty easy case for him to be in the top 5.
It was a pleasure to watch him beat up Colby Covington, in my opinion.
You're not a big Colby fan, are you?
It's like you love to hate him and you hate to love him. He's a mixed bag, that one. He's a loudmouth. And then one of my all-time favorites, we got Charlie Olives taking the number 5 spot. Why do you love Charlie Olives?
I mean, he's what is he? Is in the top group of UFC all-time wins. He's a leader in submissions. He submitted so many. Justin Gaethje. I mean, you think of all the great fighters that he has submitted. Tony Ferguson. I mean, you can go on and on. All these fighters that he submitted, and he loses the fight to Makhachev. But I think that, for whatever reason, he got spooked by the wrestling in that fight. And I think if and when they do fight, you'll see a different Oliveira against Makhachev in that next fight that they take. But I mean, he just is like on top of the UFC record book, submissions, fights, wins. And he's a dangerous guy. And he's always going for finishes. And I think, he pulls so many off that he deserves that top spot.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that one. Okay, that was awesome. And you got the rest of the 16 go check it out on Kevin's website. Agree, disagree, start the banter. I love a good list because there's always good debate involved. Let's go to the boxing one if you don't mind. There was a couple ones I was like, okay, interesting choice. And no better perspective than yours to get on it. So we got number 1. I think that's going to be undisputed that we have Terrence Crawford sitting in the number 1 spot. In my opinion, that is an absolute stand-in number 1. What were your thoughts on why you put him there?
Believe it or not, that wasn't as easy as some of the UFC guys I just talked about. Like I think Crawford and Naoya Inoue are 1 and 1A, right? And what Inoue has done, he unified 2 divisions in like just over a year. And he's been fighting the best of the best of the best and knocking them out, right? Crawford unified 2 divisions, but he won the one in 2017, won the other one in 2023. Naoya Inoue won the unified in December of 22. He unifies the bantamweight division, and then on the day after Christmas of 23, he unifies the super bantamweight division in 1 year. I mean, that's unheard of in modern boxing. And
I don't think he's real.
He's AI
or something.
I wish that they were a little closer in weight. We'll never get to see them fight, but that would be cool to see the 2 of them go at it. And he has a high knockout percentage, 23 knockouts in 26 fights. So in just my view, I feel like it's a 1A conversation, but I kind of felt like Crawford, the best fighter that either of them has fought was Errol Spence. And Crawford just surgically took apart Errol Spence. And as a result, I felt like that gave him the edge over Inoue. But if somebody makes Inoue number 1, I don't argue that.
Yeah, fair point. And I think, to go back to that Spence Crawford fight, like it was an absolute masterclass. And when you see someone at the highest level fighting very high level opposition and having that much disparity in the performance is just mind-blowing. And I mean, he's 40-0. Like there is no debating that Terrence Crawford is one of the best of our time for sure.
No.
Number 3, and I'm a big Usyk fan. I love him. And I think I've never met him. I'm sure you have. I just love his character too. I think he's just such a quirky guy. He's a
funny
very
guy.
Quirky, a very talented fighter. I love that whole European style of turning over the lead foot, constantly angles. I think he's brilliant, but I don't know if I would have put him top 3. Why did you select him as your top 3?
Well, 2 wins over Anthony Joshua. He has 3 of the 4 heavyweight belts. He was the unified cruiserweight champion. He's one of the better defensive fighters in the sport. And he's proven that he has the skill. This is a guy that when he was in the amateurs, and I realize that's a little while ago, but he fought Sean Porter in the amateurs, right? So he wasn't always a big guy. He had a growth spurt late and went up. But so he was a guy that was fighting, in the 150s, 10 years ago, and now he was the undisputed cruiserweight champion. He's 1 win away from being the undisputed heavyweight champion, and he's never come close to losing. And he's fought a lot of really good opposition. And 2 win, I don't think Anthony Joshua is an all-timer of the level, say Riddick Bowe or Evander Holyfield or somebody like that. But Anthony Joshua is a really, really good heavyweight who is also 6'6", 250 pounds, and Usyk had no issues with him. It shows how good Usyk is.
It will be interesting to see his performance against the Giant and Tyson Fury as well, which I noticed you put down as number 10.
I dropped him. I had him up a lot higher than that when I was at Yahoo. I dropped him down because I didn't like the performance against Francis Ngannou. And you're getting dropped by a guy in his first pro fight, and you win a split decision, and you're having to sweat out a judge getting it right in the final 2 rounds.
Yeah.
You have to drop. And so I penalized him for that performance. I mean, I think if you eliminate that, then you go back and, he's probably going to be up a lot higher. But we can't eliminate it. He did fight that fight. And for whatever reason, whether he was motivated or not motivated, that's what happened.
Kevin has spoken, and I agree. Going back up to number 4, Devin Haney, an absolute clinician in the sport of boxing. Very, very impressive fighter, and just absolutely dismantled Pro Grace in the most convincing landslide fashion. Why do you have Devin Haney as your number 4?
Terrific boxers coming off a lot of really good wins in a row. Not that I think a lot of George Kambosos as a fighter, but he went to Kambosos' hometown after Kambosos beat Teofimo Lopez. Everybody against him. Potential his father wouldn't be there to train him. He was cool as a cucumber. He dominates the fight. Then has to go back and beat him in a rematch. Then he comes out and he beats Loma in a really good fight. I actually had Loma winning that fight, but it was a really good fight. And, it was a toss-up fight. And, I would have penalized Haney if I thought, Loma won 10 rounds to 2 or something. But I felt like, it was a fight that, could have been a draw, could have been 7-5 either way. And so in that kind of fight, it just kind of depends on where you're sitting, how you see it. And so I didn't penalize him for it. And then he comes back against Prograis. And not only did he clearly outbox Prograis, but Prograis was supposedly the puncher. He's hurting Prograis in the fight. Yeah. And I think that showed that other dimension to his game that, that he showed in spurts, but he's never really been known as a puncher. Every now and then you'll see him, land some really crisp, hard shots, sting guys. I think he has that potential as he gets bigger and stronger as he evolves into his body. I think you'll see him be a little bit better of a puncher.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And then terrifying Artur Beterbiev, terrifying human out of Canada, which we can boast that, but I mean, the guy's clearly not Canadian, but bless him for training up here and making us all look good. He has one of the highest knockout percentages of all time. The guy's 100%.
I think he's tied for first, right?
Right? You can't argue with that. So, I mean, I know why he's in your top 5, but tell us why he got that number 5 spot.
I think he's a guy that could even take Ryan Reeves, right? You think about that, but just a joke. But no, I mean, 20-0, and he's a good boxer. He's not just a brawler. He's not a guy that's just throwing wild, crazy hands. He's breaking you down with combination. He's setting up shots, and then he's breaking out. And there's no better finisher in boxing right now than Artur Beterbiev. And I think he's going to do a number on Dmitry Bivol. I really do. I think you'll see him go out there against Bivol. He's going to raise his game. He's getting older. He's getting close to 40 years old, and he doesn't have long left. And I think, he knows that. And I think you're going to see him put on the performance of his life in June when he fights Bivol.
Which is a fight I'm personally very excited for. I love Dmitry Bivol. I've followed him since early on in his career, but I think that's a fight that he should be scared, a little scared, and training extra hard for, because that is not a man that I think anyone in the division wants to mess with right now. So that's a fight I'm extremely excited for personally. And then top 6, we've got Canelo Alvarez. I mean, the guy's 60-2, but he makes your number 6 spot. Tell us why.
I had a lot of difficulty with where to put Canelo on the list, right? Because, but he's lost 2 times. He lost to Floyd Mayweather when he was, 21 or 22 years old when he lost to Floyd in 2013. And he lost to Dmitry Bivol. And other than that, he's been there every single night. You could argue that he lost to Gennady Golovkin in the first fight and maybe even in the second fight. Clearly not in the third fight that they had. But Alvarez has just won so much. And I looked at it and I said, okay, number one, what do you make of that loss he had to Dmitry Bivol? Because it wasn't close. Bivol clearly won the fight. I think and I thought part of that was size, right? Bivol was comfortable at that weight, and I think that was a little bit too much. Canelo lost a little bit of foot quickness. Canelo's really good at getting his feet in position to punch. And I kind of felt like in that fight, he was slow to get his feet in position to punch. And was it because he was carrying some extra weight? We'll never know. But that was my sense of it. And so I went back and forth and back and forth. There were a couple guys in that slot that, that I said, that I considered to put in there. But eventually I decided, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and put Canelo number 6 because he's done it over such a long period of time. And he's beaten so many elite guys. And when he fought Bivol, he didn't fight Bivol at his own weight class. He fought him at a higher weight class. And I think that, that can be excused.
Yeah. Okay. That's clear. That's a good perspective. Now, Gervonta Davis, one of my all-time favorites, of kind of this next gen. What penalized him and threw him into the number 7 spot for you?
I don't think that's penalizing him, right? I think that's given him a lot of, Look, I had Shakur Stevenson when I was still a Iole. I had him as high as number 4, and then his last fight, I thought, he didn't look as good, and so I dropped Shakur Stevenson down. But I think Gervonta Davis is right where he should be, like middle of the top 10. Right, and okay. He's a guy that, he has never fought that really good, really elite boxer who is in his prime. And so I think fights against guys like Shakur Stevenson or Devin Haney would be fantastic fights for him because they can box, right? Now, it's going to be boxer versus slugger. I don't, again, and I'll say this, like I said about Beterbiev, Gervonta has some boxing ability. Gervonta's not Floyd Mayweather when it comes to boxing, but he's not just out there brawling, right? He sets up his shots and he knows how to put combinations together. So I kind of felt like, he deserved to be in that, that 6 to 10 range somewhere. And I felt like Canelo had done it longer than he had, and Canelo has faced more better opposition than he had. So I decided to put Canelo on top of him. And then it just kind of came down at that point, okay, where do I'm going to roll the dice with the rest of these guys. And, and I had to penalize Shakur for his last performance, even though he won. I felt like it wasn't his best performance. So that's sort of how I kind of came up with the rest of that list.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I love it. I love the list, and I think that there's going to be some movement this year too, as we start seeing some of these matches, come to fruition and things play out, just the B-vol, just as we were talking. And so will you evolve that list? Is that a yearly thing, semi-yearly? Sure. Yeah.
No, I'm going to do that. Anytime there's a major fight that somebody who is in my top 10 or in my top 16 or around my top 16 fights, I'm going to update the list, right? Because I want it to be a living, breathing thing. Because, it's like it changes over a period of time, and just because you win doesn't mean you stay where you are. You're not going to drop like a ton if you lose, and you're not going to shoot way up if you win, but there's going to be differences based on how you perform, because boxers are only performing 1 to 3 times a year generally, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
A lot of weight is put on each of those performances. And so when it comes to ranking them, like I have already started to think, if Usyk beats Fury on February 17th, is Usyk number 1 in the world? Because now he is going to join Crawford and Inoue as undisputed champions in 2 weight classes. And he's going to have done it fighting a guy. So let's see, he's 6'3", 220. So he's given up 6 inches in height. We don't know what Fury is going to weigh, but let's say easily 50 pounds in weight and more than 10 inches in reach. Yeah. If he beats a guy like that, who's also a top 10 fighter, does that make me put him all the way up to number 1? There's a lot of things that you got to think about, right?
Kevin, I'm going to be looking. I'm going to be checking. I'm going to be seeing. Now I'm invested. There's one kind of last thought I wanted to leave you with and kind of get your opinion on was I heard an interesting comment the other day, and I think it goes, in boxing, you can be boring, but you can't lose. In MMA, you can lose, but you can't be boring. What are your thoughts on that as the writer ringside taking in and passing on to the viewers?
I think that is a true statement, right? Especially among fighters in boxing. They feel like, win today, look good in the next one, right? And that while there is something said for that, I think the sport's in a better position if the fighters go for it and if they try to put on a show and they don't just try to grind out an ugly win, but they try to win impressively, and that they take the fight as a huge fight and as a huge challenge and try to perform at their absolute best. And, sometimes that's not possible, and you got to do what you got to do. But I think too often, the matchmaking is safe a lot of times, where they're not jumping up and taking those challenges because this guy, he may be too, I'm not ready for him. Like I mentioned in my story today, Terrence Crawford versus Canelo Alvarez. Why not? I got a lot of people saying, are you crazy? I said, there's not a lot of fighters that can do that. And maybe Crawford can't do it. But there's a few in history that I think can do it. And I believe Terrence Crawford is in that kind of category. So give him the chance to do it. And so I think Crawford is a guy that would want to fight the UFC way, right? What you said, or the MMA way, right? And I think that is a really apt statement that you made. And whoever came up with that, I definitely agree with. I don't care if you lose. And Arturo Gatti was the great example of that. I wanted to see Arturo Gatti fight no matter who he fought and when he fought because I knew what I was getting. There's no speculation. Is it going to be a good fight? Is it going to be an ugly fight? We knew Arturo Gatti fights were going to be barn burners. And that's what I want when I watch my fights. Is I want a guy that's given every single ounce of whatever he has in him to win. Arturo Gatti would do that. And those are the guys, and a lot of MMA fighters do that. And God bless them for doing it because they risk losing. But you know what? People want to see them. And they build themselves long-term better and make themselves into more stars by fighting that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. And Kevin, thank you for, everything you do to share the stories behind the combat sports that we know and love. And, we look forward to following your voice through that. And from someone who's personally, I'm very interested in sports presenting in the combat sports field. It's just an honor to chat with you and hear your perspective.
Thank you.
Your wealth of knowledge over the years. So thank you so much for your time and chatting with us and giving us so much awesome insider info and perspective.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe to Empire Boxing on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube.